Okay, welcome. Thank you all for coming. We will get started. Before anything, let me start off with the link in the chat, as I always try to do. So that's there. If you are interested in checking out any previous classes or signing up for reminders or anything like that, that could all be found at that link on the chat. So thank you all for joining us. And let's get started. We are in the middle of chapter 5. So as we saw last week, chapter 5 started with one topic and then kind of switched over to a different topic over the course of the chapter. Again, that's because we don't have, we didn't write the chapters, we didn't assign the chapter numbers. So if we had, there would have been probably a different little type of breakup. But as we have it the way it is, so we're in the middle of chapter 5. We are actually at verse number 13. In the past couple weeks, we've been seeing a lot of very famous verses. And this is King Solomon starting to go on his screed against, his screed against wealth. As we mentioned last week, of any person in the history of the world to talk about wealth, he is qualified, to say the least. Is one of the wealthiest people in all of history, comparatively, obviously. But both wealth in actual cash money, but also wealth in power and connections. And the the rabbis use a term. They say that there were a number of people who are molech bekipa, how exactly the word means this, but basically the understanding is that they controlled the entire world or the known world. So King Solomon being one of them, Alexander being another, etc. There's a number of people who kind of fall into that category. So King Solomon, in terms of power, besides for money, was definitely one of these people who had tremendous influence over the rest of the world. So that's what we're kind of seeing is now this is the person who knows wealth, and he could tell us how dangerous it is, but he can enlighten us in what some of the lower aspects of it are. And that's what we're seeing these weeks, this week and next week probably, or actually not next week because next week's the holiday of Shavuot, but then in the coming weeks, we're going to be seeing King Solomon giving us a taste of some of the darker parts of wealth. And these themes are very common in Jewish literature, and in just literature in general, guidance literature, but he's the originator. So if something sounds cliche, it's because he made it cliche. So that's where we're kind of seeing the sources to a lot of those things now. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump into the screen share. I can get looking at the text. Give me 1 second here, get that set up. Okay. If everyone can see this. And we are standing, well, we just did it at last week, we ended off with verse number 12, and we're starting with verse number 13 this week. I'm just going to read verse number 12 first, because it's really the header. I meant to do 13 last week, but we ran out of time. So 12 is beginning the series of verses. Verse number 13 is where we're actually holding at this week. So let me just read through the verse number 12 said, there is something bad, an evil that is sickening and can make one sick. That I have seen under the sun, and that is osher shamur levalav lirato. This is wealth that has been guarded for its owners for their detriment, for their bad. And we said that there's different types of wealth, and sometimes wealth is a good thing, right? Sometimes it's a gift. Somebody who knows how to use it properly and treats it properly and respects it, and that person is somebody who is. We're not talking about that person. We're talking about a person who has only lost from having material wealth. As I said last week, your case of the guy who gets who wins the lottery. So many people who win the lottery, they end up worse off at the end of the story than they were when they started. So that type of thing. That's what we're discussing over here is wealth that is not helpful. It's not productive. It's actually destructive. Okay, so that's what we're discussing over here. He's going to give us a very specific example of this. Kind of interesting because he goes off the idea of wealth that's kept for the owners. And he actually, in verse number 13, he's going to show us a case of wealth that is no longer, but is still hurting the person. That's just a kind of interesting setup that we're going to be seeing here in verse number 13. So, moving on over here. Again, so this is where we're up to this week, verse number 13. So we have this person who's a wealthy person, and it's to their detriment. And now he's setting up the case over here. He says, "Va'avad ha'osher hahu be'inyan ra," and this person loses that wealth, in a bad deal, in a bad experiment, a bad inyan. And this inyan just kind of basically means an idea, but in this case, it means some sort of bad deal. Okay, so this person loses the wealth in a bad deal. V'holid bain, gives birth to a son or a child. Ve'ein biado me'uma, or me'uma actually. Ve'ein biado me'uma, and does not have anything left. Nothing. They have in their hands nothing. Okay, me'uma is actually the opposite of nothing, something. But it's, in this case, when we say somebody who does not have me'uma, that means they have nothing. That's how we would translate it to English. So let me read that once again. Va'avad ha'osher hahu, this person loses this wealth, be'inyan ra, in a bad deal. V'holid bain, gives birth to a child. Ve'ein biado me'uma, and has nothing in their hands. Nothing in their hands, right? It doesn't say to give or anything like that. I was about to add that, but that's not what it says. That person has nothing in their hands. So it's kind of a funny thing. He's setting up for us a picture. He's drawing us a picture of this case of what we would imagine this person to look like, and he's going to be bringing out a very specific point. And I think it's worth keeping in mind that there's going to be a number of cases. He's going to give us a couple different examples of wealth that's painful for a person, that's hurting a person. So the first case over here is somebody who loses their wealth, somebody who was wealthy and loses it. And now is stuck with obligations, right? So they had the wealth, they lost the wealth in inyan ra, in a bad deal, and now they also have obligations. The Holid Bain, that person gives birth to a child. Well, you're going to need some money for that child, but this person is now stuck because they had money and now they don't have money. So it's a combination of the loss of money plus the new obligation, the birth of a new obligation. And that's kind of the case he's setting up for us. And he makes this point that when dealing with this child, right, he now has this child that the person has to take care of, they do not have anything in their hands. They have nothing in their hands. The sages over here, and Rashi and a lot of the commentaries, they are kind of pointing at a case of somebody who has who does not work on their mitzvot, who does not work on gathering, on doing commandments or anything like that. So that type of person will be left with nothing to show on the other side. That's kind of taking into taking it beyond kind of the spiritual realm. But I think what he's doing over here, just on a simple level, is he's just setting us up for a case. All right, so that's our case. We've got a person had wealth, lost it, has new obligations, but has no property, has nothing in their hands. Okay, very simple. Just as a side point, and I know that's not what we're talking about over here, but I think there's just kind of an interesting subtext that King Solomon brings to us, which is that this person has a child after a tremendous loss. So they had wealth and they lost it, and then they have a child. I just thought it was interesting because we do find a lot of times that people want something for a long time, right? They're looking to move on to the next step of their life, or they're hoping for something new and they're not finding it, they're not getting it. And then suddenly they suffer a tremendous loss, a terrible loss. And then this thing that they were hoping for happens. It's kind of this idea of life is definitely a roller coaster. And sometimes out of chaos, out of loss, I guess, comes some sort of salvation. It's an interesting idea. It's not the point over here. I just thought it was interesting, this juxtaposition of person loses their wealth and then has a child, right? So we have this person who does not have a child, loses their wealth, right? Everything goes haywire, and then they end up with something on the other side, this gift that they were hoping for on the other side. It doesn't help the fact that they don't have any wealth anymore. That's still a loss. But I just thought that was interesting. Kind of, we do find that happening in life pretty often. For whatever reason, God's plan is perfect and interesting, but not one that I could assume to understand. Anyway, but again, I don't think that is the point. I just think it's this kind of a side subtext over here that after loss, that's when they get the thing that they really wanted. But back to the main idea is, again, he's setting up for us this case: somebody who had wealth, lost it, now has new obligations, but has nothing in their hands. They have nothing. Okay, very simple verse. Nothing too deep in that verse itself. And with that, let's move on to the next verse number 14. Okay, just give me 1 second over here. All right, and this is an interesting verse over here. Again, these are all things that you have probably heard before, but this is the source. This is where it came from. So, and he says like this: "Kasher yatsa mibeten imo, arom." Just like kasher is just like yatsa, he leaves. This person leaves mibeten imo from his mother's stomach, arom, naked. Yashuv lechet kishaba. They will return to go as they came. Okay, so just the same way that they came out of their mother's stomach naked, that's the same way that they will return. Obviously, not return to their mother's stomach, but return to their final resting place. Uma lo yisava amalo, and this anything they will not carry in their hand from all their work. Yisa means to carry. Amal is again that hard, laborious work. So they do not carry anything from their hard work. Shiulech biyado, that they could carry, that they could take in their hands. Okay, that they could transport in their hands. To put it more exact. All right, so let's go through that again. Kasher yatsami betan imo arom, just like this person leaves their mother's stomach naked. Yashuv lalechet kishaba, they will return to go as they came. Kind of three verbs over there. Yashuv, they will return. Lalechet, to go. Kishaba, as they came. Uma lo yisava amalo, and they will not carry anything from their hard work, from their labor. Sheulech biyado, that they can transport in their hands. Okay, that's that same shoresh, that same Hebrew root over there. Lalechet, that lamed and chaf in the center of the word, is the same one over there. Lech, one of the most common Hebrew shorashim, Hebrew roots, like lech lecha in the third parsha in the Torah. All right, so that's the same shorash over there. So again, the idea is that just like this person came out of their mother's womb naked with nothing, right? You're not born with anything. So too, they will return at the end of their days with nothing. And they cannot carry anything with them in their hands. And that's an important point, a Jewish point, so to speak. And this is something that kind of stood out to me. In fact, over Pesach, over the Passover holiday, I was in Colorado visiting my family, and my wife and I went to the Museum of Natural History, where they had this was great, they had an Egypt exhibit when we were there. So it was Passover. There was an Egypt exhibit, so we got a good chance to kind of see what life was like in Egypt, and it was actually a very good exhibit. But there is so much in Egyptian culture about trying to carry things with them into the next world. The pyramids, we know, are full of treasures and all sorts of things that they tried, unsuccessfully. They tried to carry with them into the next world. The whole mummification, the whole everything, and the whole process is in a vain attempt to affect their status in the next world with the physical that they have. And that's the thing, is every culture, every point of time in civilization, people have been struggling with this point. I live for my years, but how do I know? How do I take things with me? And that's, again, King Solomon himself has been struggling with this since the first chapter, or second chapter, if I remember correctly. Right? He's been struggling with this from the beginning. Is how do we go and we make sure that something stays with us? And when in the discussion of wealth itself, we have to come to this recognition that there's no way to make sure that it comes with you to the next world. In fact, it doesn't come with you to the next world. And that's basically the Jewish philosophy that has been very central to our beliefs. We don't believe that you can take anything physical with you to the next world. Obviously, we do believe that you can take spiritual things with you to the next world. That's, again, another aspect of the Jewish piece. The Jewish philosophy. But it's interesting. You have other philosophers like Epicurus, who I happen to find very interesting. Epicurus had a belief. He struggled with this. He was a Greek philosopher, and he basically came to a conclusion that there is no world to come. There's nothing. Person dies after death. They're just done for that. That's it. Lights out. And so that, which is why he came up. There's reason to believe that when Jeremiah says that there are those people who say, eat, drink, and be happy, for tomorrow we may die, he's actually referring to the Epicureans. And that's because that was their philosophy. It would be roughly the right time zone for that to, or period in time for that to be what Jeremiah is talking about. But again, so this idea that people struggling with how do I reconcile my wealth here in this world with coming to the next world. So he says, King Solomon here says, there is no way to ensure, you can't take those things with you to the next world. Now, that's not really, again, if you think about it, it's not really what he's talking about. He's talking about this person who had wealth, lost that wealth. So now the comparison is fitting, right? You have the fact that this person has left their mother's womb naked, so to speak, or not so to speak, right? But literally naked. And that's also how they return, with nothing. Right? I mean, you don't have any assurances, you don't have anything physical with you when you're born. And so too, this person is forlorn from all their physical items, their wealth that they have. And I guess it's more of like an aside. He's also throwing in this idea that when the person's time is up, when they check in at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to take anything with them. Both, again, so there's that spiritual piece that they're not going to be able to take anything with them because we can't take anything with us. But this person also, in just general, we're talking about somebody who has no wealth anymore, used to have wealth, but no longer carries that with them. And so they're stuck in this kind of weird state where, and I think this is the point we're getting to, is we're going to have somebody who is used to a certain lifestyle, but is not going to be able to keep that up. And that's really where we're going to see the real struggle over here of what this person's going through. So we'll see that more in the coming verses. Specifically, it's important to realize we are going back even a couple more verses before this. We're specifically talking about somebody who's who has a certain strange relationship with wealth. Their relationship with wealth is one of ohev kesef lo yispa kesef, that somebody who loves money will never be satisfied with money. And so when they don't have money, right, it's one thing, person's not born with money, right? Like his example over here. Somebody's not born with money. Okay. So that's, you learn to deal with it. You learn to adapt with it, as you grow up, or as, but if a person's born with money, or a person begins a life with money, or gaining power or influence, right? That's really the case we're talking about, is the society which is run by the powerful, by the wealthy, right? So if a person's born, if a person is raised with that, or raises themselves with that lifestyle, where everything is about reaching the next thing, is about attaining more wealth, is about reaching the next level, reaching the next level of of power, that person is also going to be in a really struggling with this when they do not have any money at the end. And I think that's why we're specifically harping on this idea of a Rome, that they're naked. Nakedness is more than just you don't have anything. It's that you're vulnerable. A person who is naked is vulnerable, right? We wear clothing because it covers us up. It hides us in some ways. It communicates for us who we are. It protects us physically from the environment, etc. And when a person's born, they are naked, and because they don't have any of that. They just are who they are. And it's kind of interesting. It's a clean slate when a person's first born. But over time in our lives, we put on clothing, we hide behind masks, we do all these things that we that to kind of define for ourselves who we are. This person has built an entire facade of wealth, an entire facade of their persona is their money, their power, everything around them, their ability to control the situation, the people around them. And we saw in the last verse, with one mistake, one business error, they can lose everything. They can lose their entire everything that they've built up about themselves. That leaves them a Rome. That leaves them naked. Naked is a very, very extreme state, so to speak, of vulnerability. It's interesting. We find that Adam and Eve were called naked. It was right. The Torah makes a specific point of making us aware of the fact that they were naked, in the sense that they didn't have any. There were no airs about them. They were who they were, and that only after the sin with the tree, with the fruit of the tree, that's when they started to become aware of this need to cover themselves up with hiding who they are, who they were. In the same way, you have the snake. The snake is also in the very next verse after it says that Adam and Eve were naked. It says the snake was also a Rome, and there many of the translators switch it from being naked to being tricky. He had the ability to be very tricky, but in a sense, they're really the same thing. The snake was so honest that they were able to trick. That they that forked tongue, so to speak. It came from a sense of honesty and vulnerability. Curious, there would probably be a lot more to research into figuring that out. But again, that's the same idea over here, the same term over here. That we now have this person who's not just that they don't have anything, not just that they have nothing to carry with them to the next world, not just the fact that they have that they lost everything that they had, but they're vulnerable. They're a Rome. They're naked, and just like they were when they were first born. And it's like a reset on their life, which is quite an incredible thing. We don't, how many times in our lives do we get a chance to totally reset who we are? So this is an interesting case of this person, of what they're dealing with. Okay, so in this verse, what we have is the end of the line for this person. This person lives out the rest of their life naked. They're going to return to their final resting place as naked as they were when they first were born, and they can't carry anything with them into the next world. They can't transport anything with them. And the next verse, we're going to kind of dial it back to their actual lifestyle, what it's like during the lifetime. So it's kind of interesting how over here, what King Solomon does is he jumps to the end of their life, kind of goes into that for a second, but then he brings it back in the timeline and talks about what their life is going to look like also. So it gives kind of most extreme piece, and then brings it back to the current. All right, so let's gonna move on to the next verse over here, verse number 15. Yeah, it's chapter 5, verse number 15. And it says like this: V'gam zo ra'achola, and this also is a sickening evil. Again, that's what we're saying. It's not a bad sickness; it's a badness that can make you sick. Right? We had the same phraseology in previous verse, not the verse before, but a couple of verses ago. All right, so again, that's a that's a badness that can make one sick. And what he says is, what is this badness that can make one sick? Kol umat sheba ken yelech. That everything that is coming to them, or everywhere where they come, ken yelech is also where they go. It's kind of a strange phrasing in the word over there, but then meaning that their lives, this person's life, is in constant movement. Kol mat sheba ken yelech. Wherever they're going, so too they, or wherever they're coming from, so too they will go. Or whatever comes at them, so too it will go. What gain is there for this person to work l'ruach for air? Ruach is wind. That their work goes to the wind. So in this verse over here, we're talking about, again, what's going to be the lifestyle of this person who was wealthy and now has lost all their wealth. And that how he explains this is that everything that they do, everything that this person does, basically what we have, let me put it this way, what we find here is a person whose mazel has shifted, right? So we talk about mazel. Mazel meaning, we often refer to it as luck, but it's really more than luck. It's just the reality of their life, And so some people we there's the old joke that they say that what's the difference between a shlemiel and a shlemazel, right? That's a two Yiddish phrases. They say that the shlemiel is the waiter who spills the soup in the restaurant, and the shlemazel is the one who gets the soup spilled on. Is the patron who gets the soup spilled on them, right? So those are Yiddish phrases, and they actually have sources to them. So a shlemiel is actually, in this week's Torah portion, we have Shlumiel, who was one of the great people mentioned in this Torah portion in Parshat Bamidbar. But in a couple weeks from now, he's going to end up doing something very, very bad. He's the same person, according to the sages, the same person who gets killed by Pinchas many, many weeks from now in the coming Torah portion. So that's where the phrase Shlomiel came from. And Shlomazel is Shalom Mazel. The person has no mazel, has no luck, right? Just they don't have any luck. And so that's what we're really talking about over here, is somebody who everything was going grand, everything was working out, everything was going the way it should have gone. But what ends up happening is they lost everything, right? They had that one business venture that took a sour turn, and they lost everything. I mean, we saw this, we've seen this many times, but we definitely saw that after Bernie Madoff and that whole fiasco, where people who they were hedge fund managers, they were rolling in the dough, so to speak, and then in a short period of time, everything just fell apart around them, and their entire mazel fell apart. So that's what we're talking about, and it can make one sick, is what he's saying. That things are in constant flux like this. Kolomat Shaba Ken Yelech, that things are in constant flux. And what came to this person, or again, because of whether it's hard work, whether it's just luck, whether it's making the right choice at the right time, whatever, that could also go. That could also fly away in a short period of time. So the idea being that it's fleeting. That luck, that mazel that a person has is fleeting. Again, I don't actually like to translate mazel as luck, because it's not exactly what it is. There's a much deeper understanding to it. But that in our perception, that's kind of how we look at it. It's more than that, but it's how we kind of look at it. So in that sense, that's what we have over here, is this person who it comes and it goes. It could be one person one day, and it could be the next. It could fly to the next person the next day, and this person is stuck in the lurch with nothing to show for it. And what happens is, my yitro lo shiamol ruach. What gain is there for all that labor that the person did, and it went to the wind, right? L'ruach means, again, to the wind. The sages have an interesting thing that they point out over here. They say, what's the focus on wind? And they say that I've never actually seen this before until I was looking into it last night. But what they say is that you have, let's say you have a case of a farmer, right? So a farmer goes, they plow, they prepare the field, they plow it, they fertilize it, the whole thing. They plant all their grain. It rains, they water it, they figure out irrigation, whatever happens, and they grow all this grain, right? So, I mean, the rabbis like to talk about agricultural societies because that's what they lived in. So grain was important. So fine, you got this whole farmer, everything is done, they got all this grain, and it's all great. And then they go to crush the grain to make the flour. And the next step after you crush the grain is you winnow it, right? So when they would winnow, they would take a pitchfork, they would take all the grain, throw it up in the air on a windy day, and the wind would blow away all the chaff and leave the actual clean kernels to be eaten. So what happens? Everything goes well. This person's got a bumper crop, tons of grain, ready to go, and there's no wind. Imagine if that person there's no wind. In that case, so usually we think of, if you can think of what would go wrong in farming, something would happen to the grain, it would get a crop disease, there would be no rain, here everything's mazel, 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 everything's working well. And then the last step, there's no wind. And the entire person's entire crop, maybe it doesn't go to waste. Maybe they can make, we love to eat whole grain bread nowadays, but it used to be whole grain was the cheap stuff, and white bread was the good stuff. So this person, whatever it is, maybe they don't have to throw away everything, but suddenly there's a monkey wrench in their plans. So something's changed, the reality has changed, and it ruins everything for them. So kind of reinforcing this case of the person who was doing well, has set up a lifestyle where they're doing well, and it just disappears. The carpet is pulled out from underneath them. And the problem is, we're specifically talking about a person who doesn't learn to adapt to this situation. So they get stuck and they say, wait, but I'm a wealthy man. I'm a wealthy person. So yeah, I don't have any wealth right now, but I am a wealthy person. In the Gemara, this is referred to as an ani ben tovim, somebody who is a poor person who used to have a good life. And in fact, in Jewish law, when we give tzedakah to a person who lost their wealth, we try to give them at least to some degree what they used to have. Obviously, you can't give them a limo, but we do give them some enough to try and uphold their lifestyle. I think the bigger idea is to try and get people to adapt to a new lifestyle. But what we're saying is, we're going to see this in the next verse also, that's a very hard thing to do. So we have a person who has gone through tremendous loss, has gone through so much that now, but now there's a new reality. Everything that they had is gone. So this, again, is a badness that is sickening, right? It could really make a person sick. And that's what he's going to say. Let's just move on to the next verse over here, because this is where he's kind of coming to the main idea. And he says, what's the reality? What happens to this person who doesn't adapt to the new situation, tries to continue living like a wealthy person? So they had, right, again, what's our case? They had no obligations. They had tons of wealth. Then they lost their wealth, and now they have new obligations. So what's that person's life going to be like? So he explains over here, Gam kol yamav b'choshech yochel. That person, all their days, they will eat in darkness. Gam kol yamav, also in all their days, b'choshech yochel. They will eat in darkness. All right, choshech being darkness. V'choas harbe, with lots of anger. V'cholyo, and sickness. V'katzef, and wrath, or fury. Okay? Again, let's read that before we explain that piece by piece. Gam kol yamav, all of that person's days, b'choshech yochel, they will eat in darkness. V'choas harbe, with tremendous anger. V'cholyo, and sickness. V'katzef, and fury. Okay, so there's a couple pieces over here, a lot of different phrasing that we're using. first, just to address this one word over here, becholyo, a lot of the commentaries explain that this is a common poetic practice that we find, is that there's this vav on the end. It does not actually change the meaning of the word. It's as though the vav was not there. It would be, you would read it as vicholi. You don't read it as that, but you would translate it as the same way as you say vicholi, which means sickness. So that's not a possessive vav. In case if you know what I'm talking about, that's not a possessive suffix. That's just, the word is the same as the word is vicholi and sickness. So just to clarify that point. So he says that what is this person's life going to be like? So he says basically 4 things. Number 1, they will eat in darkness. So that's an interesting kind of imagery that we have over here. Somebody who's eating in darkness, who they don't. Why would somebody eat in darkness? I was kind of trying to think through this last night when I was preparing this. Somebody who eats in darkness means that they have their basic needs. They have food, but they don't want to look at it. They don't want to admit to what they're doing. And when you do something in darkness, it's because you want to hide it, but not hide it from the people around you necessarily, but hide it from yourself. And so that's a very real feeling. I've heard this from people who dealt with substance abuse, that they would hide their own substances from themselves, even though they knew exactly where it was, but they couldn't bear to have it there. They wanted it to not exist, and that's what we have over here. So fine, this person's got what they need to eat, right? But they don't want to look at it. It's hiding. They're hiding it in darkness. They're afraid to look at their own food. Well, that's a pretty sour lifestyle. V'chas harbe, right? Also lots of anger. Well, that's actually a pretty natural reaction over here. Person had a lot, loses it all. I mean, a natural reaction would be anger, right? We know that in modern psychology, we understand that's one of the 5 steps of 5 parts of whatever it is, coping with a trauma, is anger, right? So yeah, that's definitely what's going to happen over here. Is one of the things that the person's going to do is have this tremendous anger over what they have. Sickness, right? Sickness is the person's trying to live in a world that doesn't exist, trying to remain with a lifestyle that cannot keep going. So that's another reaction. Another reaction the person's going to have is actual sickness that they're going to have from this. And the final thing is katsef, is fury. So fury is different than anger. I had to look it up, but actually there's in the commentaries over here, there's a lot of discussion about what it is. Well, that's the difference between kas and katsef. Kas is anger, katsef is also anger. But kas is an internal anger, right? So a person is fuming with anger inside themselves, right? Katsef is that the person lashes out to those around them. So not only does the person go ahead and just live with this seething anger inside themselves, but they actually lash out to those around them. I mean, this is we know the story of the misers, right? The people who either have money or maybe they don't have as much money as people think they do, or they're just too protective over their wealth, or maybe it just doesn't exist anymore, and they just lash out. They have anger. They treat others angrily. And so that's a whole nother level. It's besides for just an internal anger where they're upset over reality, but it's an anger that caused them to lash out and hurt those around them. So these are kind of 4 reactions to living a lifestyle, trying to live a lifestyle that doesn't exist, trying to live with wealth where you don't have wealth, where it's not an option. In some ways, it is kind of similar to those steps of grief, right? You have denial, right? Eating in darkness. You've got anger. You've got sickness. So that's, I don't know exactly I can't, off the top of my head, I don't recall what all 5 steps of the grief are. But you've got this lashing out. So there is that piece over here that we're saying that this person's stuck in this cycle where they can't come to terms with their new reality. And in many ways, this is just a life lesson. Forget the person with the wealth who lost all the wealth and all. Yeah, he's given us a whole case, but in reality, it's just for all of us. We have to, we know, obviously we know this, but we have to learn to adapt to new things. Things come up, they hurt, they're hard, and they're painful, but we have to learn to adapt to them. Otherwise, we're going to sit in the same situation, eating in darkness, with anger, sickness, and lashing out to the people around us. So that's where we're going to get up to today. Again, the main idea is learning to adapt to new circumstances. We'll pick up again next week. We will not have a class because it will be the holiday of Shavuot. So instead, God willing, the week after that, we should be able to have a class. And then at some point in the summer, I'll be taking a short vacation. So I'll keep you aware of that situation. Thank you for joining us this week. And so glad to see you guys, everyone here. And we'll keep an eye open for the next class.